Disclaimer: this story is a dramatized narrative created for entertainment purposes. It does not promote or support any inappropriate relationships or behaviors. All characters are fictional and above 18 years of age. Viewer discretion is advised. The storm rolled in faster than I expected. Thick gray clouds covered the sky, and within minutes, the rain began to pour like the heavens had opened up all at once. I had just finished cleaning up the kitchen when the first crack of thunder rattled the windows. The lights flickered, and I muttered to myself, half laughing at how spooky it felt. There was something about rainstorms that always made the house feel quieter, heavier, like the air itself was watching. My stepson, Liam, had come home just a few days earlier from college. He was staying with us for the long weekend, and though we didn't have the closest relationship, I could tell something about him had changed. He was quieter than usual, more observant. He would glance at me when he thought I wasn't looking, and sometimes it felt like he had something on his mind but didn't know how to say it. That evening, the power finally cut out entirely. The wind outside howled through the trees, and the house creaked like it had its own heartbeat. I grabbed a few candles from the drawer and lit them, setting them on the table in the living room. The soft glow flickered across the walls, casting long shadows that danced every time the thunder boomed again. I was curled up on the couch with a blanket, sipping on some lukewarm tea, when Liam came downstairs. He was barefoot, wearing just sweatpants and a hoodie. His hair was damp, like he'd just taken a shower, and he looked a little restless, like the storm was crawling under his skin too. "Power's out upstairs too," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, whole house." "Might be out for a while," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. I lit some candles, so at least we won't be in complete darkness. He nodded and sat down across from me on the edge of the armchair, his eyes scanning the flickering light. For a few seconds, we sat in silence, listening to the wind and rain. Then he spoke again. "It's weird, being back here. Everything feels different." I looked at him and smiled. "You've been gone a long time. People grow, things change." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine in a way that felt unusually intense. "Have you changed?" His question caught me off guard. I wasn't sure what he meant or what he was getting at, but there was something about the way he said it, slowly, thoughtfully, that made my heart beat a little faster. "I suppose we all do," I said, keeping my voice calm. The room felt smaller all of a sudden, like the candlelight was pulling us closer together without either of us moving. I wasn't sure if I was reading into things or if there was genuinely something lingering in the air between us. It wasn't necessarily inappropriate, it was just odd. The kind of moment where you're not quite sure what's happening, but your instincts tell you something's shifting. "I remember when I used to hate the rain," he said, leaning back. "But now, I kinda like it. The quiet. The way it slows everything down." I nodded. "It does that, doesn't it?" More silence followed. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that makes you aware of your breathing, your thoughts, and the way someone else is watching you. I could feel his gaze, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me wonder. And I hated myself a little for wondering. Then the wind slammed a branch against the side of the house, and both of us jumped. I laughed nervously, setting my tea down. "That one was close." "I'll check it out," he said, standing up. I grabbed his arm before I could stop myself. "Liam, no, it's pouring. Just let it go. Whatever it is, we can check it in the morning." He looked down at where my hand touched his arm, then back at me. "Okay," he said softly. He sat back down, but this time, not across the room. He chose the other side of the couch, closer than before. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, suddenly aware of how cold it had gotten inside the house. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "Here." He reached over and pulled the edge of the blanket over his legs too, sharing it with me without asking. His arm brushed mine, warm and steady. We both pretended like nothing happened. Like we weren't suddenly sitting so close we could feel each other breathe. I looked over at him, meaning to say something, anything to break the tension, but when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. His eyes met mine again, searching, serious. "Can I ask you something?" he whispered. "Sure." Why does it feel like something's always been left unsaid between us? The question hit me like thunder. I couldn't answer. Not right away. Because deep down, I had been asking myself the same thing. And as the storm raged outside, a different kind of storm began brewing inside that room. But what happened next? I never saw it coming. I didn't answer him right away because I wasn't sure if I even had an answer. His words echoed in my mind, something left unsaid. Maybe it was just the weather making everything feel more intense. Or maybe he was right. Maybe there was something neither of us had ever been brave enough to name. The wind kept howling outside, and the rain pounded harder against the windows. I could hear the gutters overflowing, the water running down in sheets. It was loud, but inside everything was still, quiet, like time had slowed down to let this moment stretch just a little longer than it should have. I glanced at Liam again. His eyes hadn't left me. He was studying my face, waiting for me to respond. There was nothing playful in his expression, nothing teasing. Just this calm, serious curiosity that made it hard to look away. "I don't know," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we've just never really talked like this before." He nodded slowly. "That's probably true." I felt a strange tightness in my chest. The kind you get when you're about to step into unfamiliar territory and you're not sure if it's safe. The candlelight flickered again, casting soft shadows on his face. I could see how much he'd changed, how much older he looked since the last time he was home. He wasn't the kid who used to play video games all night anymore. He carried himself differently now. More grounded. More aware. "You always kept to yourself when you were younger," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. "Yeah," he agreed. I guess I didn't really know where I fit in. There it was again, that honesty. It caught me off guard. Liam had never been the type to open up, not even with his dad. But now, there was no pretending. The walls were down, and the silence around us made everything feel more raw, more exposed. "I didn't want to get in the way," he added. "Dad was always busy. You had your routines." I just kept my head down. That made my heart sink a little. I had no idea he felt that way. I always assumed he preferred being alone. But maybe that was just what he allowed us to see. "I wish I had known," I said quietly. "I would have tried harder." He gave me a small smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's okay. I think we were all just figuring things out back then." We sat in silence again, listening to the storm wrap itself around the house. The power wasn't coming back anytime soon, and something about the night, the closeness, the conversation, was making all the usual boundaries blur. Not in an inappropriate way, but in a way that made things feel more personal, more emotionally exposed. I stood up, needing a moment to breathe. "I'm going to check the back door," I said, mostly to have something to do. "Sometimes it leaks during heavy rain." He nodded and stayed seated while I walked into the kitchen. I could feel my thoughts racing, heart pounding for reasons I didn't fully understand. I pressed my hand to the doorframe. No leak. Everything was fine. Except, inside me, nothing felt fine. There was a strange mix of confusion, guilt, and curiosity churning together. When I turned back, Liam had followed me and was now standing in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, watching me. There was a pause between us again, one of those long silences that meant more than a dozen conversations. "You always seemed so distant," he said suddenly. "But not cold. Just guarded." I looked at him, unsure how to respond. "You were the first person I trusted after Mom," he added. "But I didn't know how to tell you that." The room felt smaller again. Not because of space, but because of how open he was being. It was like the rainstorm outside had stripped away every filter we usually hid behind. We were just two people standing in a dimly lit kitchen, no distractions, no noise, just emotions we hadn't dared to name before. "Liam," I started, but my voice cracked. "I didn't mean to ever make you feel like you weren't part of this family." "I know," he said gently. "And I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I just needed to say it out loud. I don't think I've ever been this honest with anyone before." That hit me harder than I expected. I had always seen him as independent, a bit withdrawn, but capable. I never realized how much he had held back. How much he'd kept inside all these years. "Maybe tonight is just one of those nights," I said softly, "where everything you've buried finds a way out." "Maybe," he replied, stepping closer. "But that's not always a bad thing." The thunder rolled again, and a sudden gust of wind slammed the windows, making both of us jump. I gave a nervous laugh and turned back toward the candles. He stayed close behind me, and for a moment, I felt his presence, calm, steady, but undeniably there. Not pressing forward, not crossing a line, just there. And that was when something strange happened. The lights flickered back on for just a split second, and then went out again. But in that 1 second of clarity, everything felt different. The air between us. The way he looked at me. The questions neither of us could ask. The ones that, deep down, we were both afraid to answer. And as the rain continued to fall and the shadows returned, I knew this storm wasn't going to pass easily. Something had been stirred that night, something real. And no matter how much I tried to push it down, it wasn't going away. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it grew heavier, louder, as if it was echoing the tension that now hung in the air between us. I went back to the couch, hoping the familiar comfort of the blanket and the flickering candles would help calm my nerves. But they didn't. Liam followed a few steps behind and sat back down, this time leaving a little more space between us than before. Still, his presence filled the room in a way it hadn't earlier. Neither of us spoke for a few minutes. The quiet wasn't awkward, it was thick. Like both of us were sifting through old memories and unspoken words, trying to understand how we got here. I couldn't help but replay his question from earlier in my head. Why does it feel like something's always been left unsaid between us? The truth was, I'd never taken the time to think about the way our relationship had formed, or hadn't. When Liam's father and I got married, Liam had already been in his teens. He was polite, respectful, but distant. I assumed he needed space to adjust, so I gave it to him. But maybe I gave too much. Maybe, without realizing it, I'd taught him to keep his feelings to himself around me. "I think I used to be afraid of disappointing you," Liam said suddenly, cutting into my thoughts. "You always seemed like you had everything under control. Like nothing could shake you." I looked at him, surprised. "That's not true. I was figuring things out just like everyone else." He let out a quiet laugh. "Yeah, maybe. But to me, you were always calm. Composed. Like you never needed anyone's help." It was strange hearing that. Because I remembered so many nights I cried in secret, overwhelmed, feeling like I wasn't doing enough, trying to be a good wife, trying to be some version of a stepmom, without overstepping boundaries that were never clearly defined. "Maybe we both misunderstood each other," I said. He nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe. I wanted to ask what brought all of this out now, why he was suddenly saying the things he'd kept buried for years. But before I could, he spoke again, softer this time. Things between you and Dad were never really the same after I left, were they? That question stung in ways I didn't expect. I glanced down at my hands, avoiding his eyes. No, I admitted. They weren't. Liam didn't push, but I knew he was waiting for more. So I gave him a little. Your father became distant. Cold, almost. Like being alone in the house with me was harder than being away. We stopped talking about real things. Just routines. Bills. Chores. It felt like living with a stranger. And now? He's out of town, I said quietly. Work trip. Left the same day you came back. The silence that followed said more than either of us could. I wasn't trying to hide anything, but I also didn't want to open wounds that hadn't healed yet. The truth was, my marriage had started falling apart long before Liam noticed. We just kept pretending things were fine. Pretending was easier than confronting what we didn't want to admit. Liam looked at me with something new in his eyes. Not pity. Not judgment. Just understanding. I always felt like I didn't belong anywhere, he said. Not fully with Mom, not fully with Dad, and definitely not here. But being back now, I don't know. It's different. I studied him for a moment. Different how? He hesitated, then shook his head. I'm not sure yet. The wind slammed against the windows again, making the whole house shudder. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, trying to shake off the chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I thought we were done talking for the night, but then Liam leaned forward, his voice low. Do you ever feel like people expect you to fit into a certain role, and if you step outside of it, you become the bad guy? That stopped me in my tracks. Yes, I said, barely breathing the word. All the time. He looked down, playing with the edge of the blanket between his fingers. Sometimes I wish I could just say what I feel without wondering how it would change everything. My heart pounded harder. Because I knew exactly what he meant. But neither of us said it. We just sat there in the candlelight, the thunder still rolling overhead, and the rain still hammering the world outside. And whatever this was, this thing hanging between us, it wasn't going anywhere. Not tonight. Not now. The house groaned as another gust of wind swept through the trees outside. The storm showed no sign of slowing, and inside, the silence between us stretched into something heavy, almost unbearable. I could feel the weight of Liam's words circling my mind. I wish I could just say what I feel without wondering how it would change everything. That line stayed with me. It pressed against the part of me I'd been trying to keep buried, the part that wasn't just confused, but curious, conflicted, and dangerously close to unraveling. He stood up suddenly and walked to the window, arms crossed as he looked out into the darkness. His reflection flickered in the glass, broken by streaks of rain. I watched him quietly, wondering what was going through his head. He seemed restless again, like there was something building inside him that he couldn't hold back much longer. I used to dream about getting out of this house, he said, not turning around. Starting over somewhere else. Somewhere quiet, where nothing reminded me of things I didn't understand. I hesitated. And now? Now I feel like I came back just to face everything I ran from. The way he said it made my chest tighten. There was something deeper in his voice, his pain, regret, maybe even longing. I stood too, slowly, unsure why but needing to be closer to him. The storm outside felt like a reflection of what was happening inside both of us. Unspoken truths swirled around like debris in the wind, slamming against the walls we'd spent years building. Liam finally turned, his eyes darker, clouded with emotion. I know this sounds crazy, but being here with you, it feels like the only real thing I've known in a long time. My breath caught. I wanted to say something, but I didn't trust my voice. His words shook something loose inside me that I wasn't ready to face. He stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, like he was giving me every chance to stop whatever was happening. But I didn't move. I couldn't. The space between us shrank with every second, and my heart beat so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Tell me I'm wrong," he said, his voice low, barely audible over the storm. "Tell me I'm imagining this." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Because I didn't know what the truth was anymore. And in that moment, nothing felt more dangerous than the silence between us. Before I could respond, before I could even process what was happening, there was a sudden loud knock at the front door. We both froze. The sound cut through the room like a blade, sharp and unexpected. Liam's eyes darted toward the hallway, then back to me. My heart jumped in my chest. It was nearly midnight, the storm still raging outside. No one should have been out there. No one should have been knocking. The knock came again, harder this time, followed by the faint sound of someone calling out. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a man's voice. I stepped back instinctively, grabbing the edge of the table to steady myself. Liam moved toward the hallway without saying a word, his body tense like he was bracing for something. "I'll check," he said quietly. "No, wait," I followed him, unease growing with every step. As we reached the front door, lightning flashed through the frosted glass panel. And in that quick burst of light, I saw the outline of someone I hadn't expected to see tonight. It was him, Liam's father. My husband. He wasn't supposed to be home for another 2 days. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near here. My stomach turned cold as Liam reached for the doorknob. I grabbed his wrist. "Wait. Don't open it yet." He looked at me, confused, maybe even a little afraid. And in that moment, everything changed. The tension between us, the closeness, the words that had almost been said, all of it slammed into a wall. Because whatever storm we had been caught in together, it was nothing compared to what was waiting on the other side of that door. And now, we were out of time. Liam pulled his hand back slowly, eyes locked on mine, reading the fear and confusion written all over my face. Another knock followed, louder, more impatient this time. I hesitated, then stepped forward and opened the door. He stood there, soaked from head to toe, hair dripping, eyes sharp and unreadable. "I forgot my charger," he said flatly, holding up a soaked backpack like it explained everything. "Figured I'd come back and grab it." For a moment, no one said a word. The sound of the storm poured in behind him, mixing with the silence that had taken over our home. He looked past me and saw Liam, standing just a few feet away, stiff and quiet. His expression shifted. Something in his gaze changed, like he'd walked into something he hadn't expected. His voice dropped. "What's going on?" I forced a smile, my voice steadier than I felt. "We were just talking. Power's out. Got caught up in the storm." He nodded slowly but didn't move. "Mind if I come in?" Liam stepped aside, jaw clenched, eyes now distant. As his father walked in and disappeared into the hallway, Liam leaned in close and whispered, "This changes everything." I didn't know what he meant, if it was a warning, a promise, or something in between. But something had shifted between us. And it wasn't going back. Later that night, once the storm had passed and everyone had gone quiet, I noticed Liam's phone buzzing on the table. A new message lit up the screen. It wasn't from a friend. It was from his mother. "Did you tell her? She deserves to know the truth about what happened that night." My heart stopped. Because whatever I thought I understood, I'd only seen half the story. The message on Liam's phone echoed in my mind like a second storm. I stood there, frozen, staring at the screen. She deserves to know the truth about what happened that night. I didn't know what night his mother meant, but I knew now, something deeper had been buried. And it wasn't about feelings or what had nearly happened in that quiet space between us. It was about a past that had never been spoken, a truth hidden behind silence. The next morning, the sky was clear, and the storm had passed, but the air between us was still heavy. Over coffee, Liam finally spoke. He told me everything. Years ago, during a heated argument between his parents, something was said, something that had made Liam question his place in his father's home. He'd overheard his father suggest that raising Liam wasn't his responsibility anymore. It had changed everything for him. That's why he distanced himself. That's why he left early for college. That's why, now, he felt lost between two people he didn't fully trust. I didn't know who to believe, he said. But being here again, I realized you never pushed me away. I just never gave you a chance. I reached across the table and took his hand. You've always belonged here, Liam. You just needed to see it. There were no grand endings, no dramatic conclusions, just quiet understanding. The storm had cleared more than the sky. It had cleared the past. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real healing we both needed.